No. Obama and Raul Castro, as we speak, are having a joint press conference. And this little Raul just let Obama have it. He has called on Obama to lift even more restrictions on the blockade. That's what the Castros call the embargo. They call it the blockade. Cuban people think there's actually Navy ships out there blockading anybody from getting into Cuba. And then he demanded the return of Guantanamo Bay. Here are the sound bites. This is the first, with Castro lecturing Obama that his efforts to remove the blockade have been insufficient.
Much more could be done if the U.S. blockade were lifted. We recognize the position of President Obama and his administration against the blockade and his repeated appeals to Congress to have it removed. The most recent measures adopted by his administration are positive, but insufficient.
Can you believe this? And Obama stands there and nods? Jeez. You know, folks, the blockade, Castro has told the poor Cuban people ever since 1962 that the reason they're poor is the American blockade. The only reason they do not have jobs, the only reason they do not have parts for their 57 Chevys, and the only reason why their buildings are falling apart, I saw CNN did a stand-up report. One of the reporters this morning is in Havana. And I don't know what this guy was thinking, but he chose a position. It looked out, bombed out Beirut behind him. He had a picture of Havana framed that would look like bombed out Beirut. It just looked dilapidated and 60 years old, which it is. Now, normally these reporters would try to find some new hotel to stand in front of, or some speakeasy little coffee shop or what have you. But no. They chose an absolute picture to frame this report in that made Havana look like it had been bombed back to the Stone Age. You know, and there are a lot of Americans, but a lot of liberals who think that Raul Castro and Fidel are right, that it's our blockade, the embargo, which has limited Cuba and deprived it of economic opportunity. And here's the thing. We are the only country in the world that does not trade with Cuba. Well, the only major country. I don't know what they do in Myanmar, and I don't know what Belize does. But I can tell you that we are the only major country that does not trade with them. And yet that is portrayed as the reason why the Cuban people are still living in poverty. And, of course, it would make sense for the Castros to say this. They're not going to blame themselves, and they obviously are not going to blame communism. They blame America for it, for standing in the way. But since they're able to trade with Saudi Arabia, they're able to trade with the UK, every nation in Europe, they trade with Canada, they trade with the Chicoms, they trade with everybody. The only reason the Cuban people are poor is the Cuban government. The only reason the Cuban people don't have any freedom or economic upward mobility is communism. You know, it is striking to have to still explain this. It amazes me to think of the number of people to whom the truth and realities of communism is news that they've not heard before. Here is Raul Castro now demanding that we give back Guantanamo Bay.
The blockade stands as the most important obstacle to our economic development and the well-being of the Cuban people. That's why its removal will be of the essence to normalize bilateral relations. And actually, it will also bring benefits to the Cuban emigres who wish the best for their families and their country.
Oh, my God.
In order to move forward towards normalization, it will also be necessary to return the territory illegally occupied by Guantanamo Naval Base.
Why don't you kick us off, Raul? You're such a major power. Why don't you kick us out of there? If we're illegally occupying the Guantanamo base, just move in and send your military, kick us out. But they can't. But did you notice this little thing about immigrants? And actually, it will also bring benefits to the Cuban immigrants who wish the best for their families and their country. So he's making a pitch for amnesty. He's joining Obama in his illegal amnesty push. But right there, he said it, the blockade stands as the most important obstacle to our economic development. Really? What a crock. You know, there have been, when did this? This would have been there was a period of time in the first Clinton administration where the Clinton administration began talking about lifting the embargo. I don't know that it was Bill Clinton per se. He might have. But there were others in his State Department who began to publicly talk about it. And do you know what? Any time that happened, and it wasn't just that one time, there have been many instances in the last 30, 40 years where an American official here or there publicly speaks about the proposition it's time to leave or lift the embargo. Do you know what Castro did in every instance? The one involving the Clinton administration, he shot down a little Cessna 172, some charity flight. A flight was a private, I think it was a single-engine prop plane that was flying charity goods from somewhere to Cuba. He shot it down, thereby stopping all talk of lifting the embargo. The last thing they want is lifting the embargo. If the embargo is really totally lifted, they're out of excuses. The Cuban people are not going to begin prospering. The Cuban people are not going to experience upward economic mobility if we totally eliminate the embargo. It isn't going to happen because it's still going to be a communist country. And old Raul and his regime clearly know that. His demanding the embargo be lifted is actually intended to make sure that it isn't. What do you mean, Rush? That doesn't make sense. Yes, it does. You get the President of the United States standing next to you. Now, any other president, this would be true. With Obama, you don't know. But if it's any other president standing next to him and he starts ridiculing the embargo, no president could then lift it after such a demand without appearing to be a total sellout, a total coward. Oh, you lift the embargo because this little communist tells you to? Raul Castro knows that that's the wrong way to get the embargo lifted, to publicly demand it. There's no way Obama can then go back and do it without people saying, you're kowtowing to a little communist thug. But that may not be applicable with Obama. It's his last year in office, and he doesn't care about any of that. So with Obama, it might work. I don't know. Anybody else, that would be the fastest way to keep that embargo intact, is to publicly demand that it be lifted. Back after this. Don't go away. You know, it's kind of fun watching this press conference here with Obama and Raul Castro. Raul Castro does not like this. You know, in communist Cuba, the press doesn't get to do press conferences. They go out, they make commandment speeches, whatever, and the press is then sent a memo with what to write. And they do. And here Obama has brought along the U.S. press, and Raul is routinely taking off his headphones and interrupting, clearly not familiar with this format here. He looks a little irritated. While Obama, of course, is in his element. He's on the same soil that Che Guevara once walked. He's in the same soil occupied by Fidel Castro. He's the first president since Calvin Coolidge to go to Cuba. By the way, you know, I have to revise and extend my remarks. I goofed up big mere moments ago. I said that Raul Castro demanding that Obama lift the embargo, with Obama standing there, was the absolute worst way of going about it. I forgot this is exactly how the Iranians did it. The Iranians got their way with Obama by publicly demanding what they wanted, and he acquiesced. John Kerry, too. These guys are routinely humiliated by the Iranians, and now we've got a nuke deal with them.